We live in a culture that is almost consumed by the idea of beauty. And we will spend any amount of money to make ourselves what we think is beautiful. It's been a long time since I've read such statistics, but I read once that the average American spends $600 on the inside of their head in a year, while we spend $100 billion collectively on the outside of our head each year, trying to make ourselves beautiful. This young woman's claim to fame is that she was beautiful. I will tell you the story. Actually, the King James Version did not find it sufficient to say she was beautiful, but the King James Version said she was beautiful and lovely. And I tried to plumb the depth of what that meant, but it's what we would say in modern terms, that she was pretty on the outside and pretty on the inside. She was beautiful and lovely. She was not one in a million, as you'll find out in the message. She lived in an empire of 50 million people, where historians estimate there were 25 million women. She was 1 in 25 million. When the king sought to search for a queen, the historian Josephus said they finally narrowed it down to the 400 most beautiful women in the empire, and they sent them to the palace, where for a year they primped and treated their skin with oils and did everything that they could to make them even more beautiful before they went before the king. And as each young woman was chosen or invited to appear before the king, they were allowed to choose from a vast wardrobe, and also to wear every kind of jewelry and any makeup that she desired. Ultimately, finally, the decision was hers. And if you study and read the book of Esther, you will find that she did none of those things. She went as she was. And the Bible said that the king loved her more than all of the women. Here's the interesting thing. Some people think they are too pretty to do God's will. And in spite of her physical beauty, as you will see in our story today, ultimately she was asked to risk everything. And she finally came to this conclusion: I will obey, and if I perish, I perish. So we're going to be talking today about this woman, a orphan. I would to God that I had time to plumb the depth of what it means to be an orphan, alone in the world, but she was. She was also a captive, a slave girl. She was a woman in a society that did not value women at all. And her future seemed very dim. But because God had his eye upon her, she became the most powerful woman in the world by the stroke of the hand of God. Thank you for coming, and go enjoy yourself at Kids Church. Please have your photograph taken after service with Esther on your cell phone. I'm going to read to you just one passage, and then I'm going to tell you a story. The reason I must tell you the story is because it's 10 chapters, and I either have to tell you the story or read all 10 chapters of the book of Esther. And I would encourage you, if you've not read that story ever, or you've not read it in a long time, it is a remarkable literary work. It has villains and heroes, kings and wars. It has power and greed, and it also has a happy ending. You will love the story of Esther. It's found in a book that bears her name. I want to read to you from Esther chapter 4 and verse 14b, the last part of that verse. Mordecai asked the young slave girl this question: "Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Who knows? But what all that has happened to you and the place that you are now, all of this could have happened because of the providence of God. It could be that you were born for this purpose and for such a time as this. I want to submit something to you this morning on the heels of revival, on the heels of a series of epic sermons where ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. Peter walked on water. Jonah won 600,000 people to the Lord in the largest single revival ever recorded in the pages of history. These people accomplished seemingly the impossible. Perhaps this could be the most significant moment in your life. Right now, this very moment, in this very place, in this very hour, perhaps it could be. But it would be reasonable to ask the question, what is a single moment in a life that spans many decades? Moments, by definition, are simply a date on a calendar, a mark on a clock. It's a fleeting thing. They come and go unnoticed, unaccounted for, and unvalued. But what if you knew that sometime soon, somewhere right in front of you, there was coming a moment, a precise point in your life, a divine opportunity rich with potential and filled with endless possibilities, that if you seized it, could determine the course and momentum of your life and your eternal future? I mean, that's a deep question, isn't it? We certainly exist in a moment of time, the now. It's a difficult thing to forget the past, and it is also a difficult thing to avoid wishing for the future. Some people wish their lives away. I wish vacation would get here. I wish I could get out of school. I wish that I could retire. I wish tomorrow would come faster. And others spend their life saying, I wish we could go back to the good old days when life was simpler and when things were more obvious and less burdensome and gas was cheaper and whatever causes us to look back over our shoulder. But I want you to know today that the significance of a moment was how it was for this girl named Esther. Some of the things I've already told you, but let me just bring you up to date quickly. The book is called Esther, and it bears her name, but she did not write it. Also, some might say that she is not the most significant character in the book. Perhaps that belongs to the king. The king in our modern vernacular would be Xerxes, but he was actually, in his own time, let me find his name quickly, was Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus was actually the name that you will find in your Bible. Ahasuerus, his name appears 175 times in the book of Esther. So some might say that he's the primary character. Or perhaps it would belong to Mordecai. Mordecai is the cousin, 15 years older than Esther, and when she became an orphan, it was Mordecai who not only raised her and cared for her, but also would hang out to the palace where he could kind of keep an eye on her once she ended up there. And certainly the villain would have to be a man named Haman, a Persian, a very high-ranking, intelligent officer who actually, you remember from our discussion of Daniel that the nation of Babylon and later the nation of the Medes and the Persian was divided into provinces, and provinces would be what we might compare to our nations today, and every province had a prince or a president. And so Haman was actually the highest ranking of all of the presidents, right next to Ahasuerus, the king himself. In fact, the king issued an edict that anyone who saw Haman in public was to bow to him and show him respect. And so we have these four primary characters: Esther, Mordecai, the king, Ahasuerus, and Haman, the villain. This story actually takes place in the year about 480 BC. We're still about 500 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. And so I want to kind of set things up for you so you'll know what's taking place and how it's possible that this king is looking for a queen. He has a queen. Her name is Vashti. Vashti also is a very beautiful woman. It happened to be in those days that kings were free to choose whoever they would, and they had a large harem, a large group of women that they would choose from, and because of his power, he could just simply say, you're coming to the king's house, and so it would be. So this king, Ahasuerus, is actually the son of Darius. You remember the king Darius? And so here we have a scenario where Darius had actually gone into battle against the Greeks. And the Persian Empire was the greatest empire, actually, that ever existed on the face of the earth. It was the largest empire to have ever existed. It spanned literally all of the known world. And so suddenly there is rising the Greeks, and the Greeks have certain weaponry and certain technology that makes them dangerous. And so Darius would often fight them and was always successful, but he went to a place called Marathon, and there he had a war with the Greeks, and he was unsuccessful, and the Greeks defeated him there, and he spent the rest of his life amassing a 1,000,000-man army, and it was his intention to go back and to destroy the Greeks, but he died too soon, and that responsibility fell to his son. I'll tell you a bit of trivia about this place called Marathon. There, the battle actually fell to the hands of the Greeks, and the Persians were defeated, and there a slave actually ran all the way to Athens to report the news that the Greeks had won. The distance from Marathon to Athens was 26 miles. Hence we know how we got the marathon race. So whenever the Olympics were reestablished or established again in, I think, 1896 or thereabouts, they actually ran again the distance from Marathon to Athens to kick that whole thing off. But so he went to report that the Greeks had won because it was big news. But now Ahasuerus has the responsibility to avenge the defeat that Darius suffered because Darius is no longer living. So he actually calls together a summit, and for 6 months, he meets with his warlords for the express purpose of developing a battle plan about how we will go in and conquer the Greeks. And after 6 months of unending work, they came to the conclusion that they had a fail-proof plan. They would definitely succeed. And Xerxes was so certain. Ahasuerus. I practiced that last night. He actually was so convinced that he had a perfect plan that he threw a party to celebrate a victory for a war that had not yet taken place. They decided that they would spend a week in advance celebrating their victory. You know what that reminds me of? Do you know whenever Rick Pitino came here to coach at the University of Kentucky, true story, Bill Kitely, who used to be the equipment manager at UK, was somewhat of a friend of mine, and I actually did his portrait. And during our time together, he told me that whenever Rick Pitino came to the University of Kentucky, that the first thing that he did when he met with his players, the first thing that he did was he went out into the gym where they had a step ladder there, and the first thing they did before he ever talked to them, before they ever bounced a ball, they climbed up the ladder and took the scissors and cut down the nets. That's what this king is doing. We're cutting down the nets. We haven't shot a shot, we haven't had a practice, we haven't lifted any weights, but we're going to whip the Greeks. And so they celebrated. Man, did they celebrate. The king spared no expense. He brought out the wine, he brought out the booze, and they had a ball. They drank out of golden goblets, and no two golden goblets were the same. They were putting the wealth and the prestige of Persia on display, and it was the highest individuals in all of the kingdom, and they partied for an entire week. By the end of the week, they were drunk. And so at the end of the week, the king has an idea that he will send for the queen and have her to come in and parade and to dance before this group of drunk men. And so he sent word, send Vashti in and have her to dress in all of her finery and come, and I want everybody to see my beautiful queen. And she said, no thanks, I'm not coming to your party. That did not go over well. And so the king inquired of his wise men, what should I do with her disobedience? And they said, hey, if you don't deal with this, we're going to suffer throughout the land, because this happened in public. You won't be able to keep this secret. And when all these noblemen go home, their wives won't obey them either. And there's going to be an upheaval in the country, O king. You better deal with this. And so immediately he stripped her of her queenship and he demoted her to an ordinary citizen. He didn't kill her, but she was no longer queen. And so they said, we have an idea. Why don't you get yourself another queen? He said, good idea. Now we come to the beginning of the story of Esther. Now it took him 4 years to get a queen. The reason that it took him 4 years to get a queen is because before he went about the business of getting the queen, he set off to defeat the Greeks. And after 2 years of waging wars against the Greeks, it was going nowhere. He was not winning. They were holding their ground. It was not being successful at all. And somebody told the king, you need a break. You deserve a break today. Why don't you go home and choose yourself a queen? He said, good idea. He went home, and so they got together, and they had a plan. What we will do is we will send men of good taste to all the provinces of the empire of Persia, and we will look at all of the women, and we will choose the very most beautiful virgins, and we will bring them here to the king, and you can choose a new queen. He said, great idea, and they went to work. So it took about a year for them to go all across the empire and examine all of the beautiful women. And as I already told you, Josephus said that about 400 women, the most beautiful women, about 400 of 25 million, were hand chosen and brought there to the palace to begin a year-long beauty treatment plan that all of them were going through. And so they go through this plan, and then at the appropriate time they begin the process of bringing women before the king. And so now we kind of have the stage is set. Whenever all of this happens, when a woman is going before the king, she can dress in any of the wardrobe that is provided and all of the jewelry and have herself made up and all of these kinds of things. And whenever it came Esther's turn, she didn't do any of that. She just said, I'll just go like I am. I don't know what that means. I don't even know what beauty was in those days. You know what I'm saying? I really don't know. I mean, the definition of beauty seems to have changed throughout the passage of time. There are a lot of countries today where the hunger and poverty is so common. To be really plump and round is a very beautiful thing. Here in America, everybody wants to be skinny, but that's not beautiful necessarily all around the world, right? You've seen in some of the nations of the world what they describe, and I don't have any idea what it was, but whatever it was, when she went in before the king, he was immediately swept off his feet by her beauty, and the Word of God records that he loved her more than all of the other women. And so his response was to put a crown on her head and to make her the new queen. And it says here, so Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So now everything is kind of set. This is not arbitrary. I want you to see what is taking place. It's not arbitrary that an obscure Jewish orphan, a child of the exiled people, is exalted to the highest position of any woman in the world. This is not a coincidence. There's a power working here that's greater than the power of the king. There's something at work behind the scenes taking place, and that's what I want you to see today in what seems to be an ordinary life where people go to work and cook food and have donkeys that pull carts and do all the things that people do. Behind the scenes, there is a God in heaven that is bringing to pass his own purposes, working providentially in the affairs of mankind. So the next thing I want you to observe is that Mordecai, the man who raised her once her parents had died, he begins to hang around the palace. And he is always near the entry there so that he can get whatever word that he might be able to keep up with. He still is concerned. He still loves her. He is still connected. But now she is in a place where he cannot go. She's in front of the king, and the best he can do is get to the palace door. And so the interesting thing This also seems like a coincidence. You got this guy who's 15 years older, so she's about 20, he's about 35, so you have this young man always hanging out there. He's a part of various conversations. He just is a regular fixture. No one seems to notice him, and one day he overhears a couple of guards. These are like Secret Service men. These are royal officials who guard the king's private quarters, and he hears them talking, and they are angry with the king, and they are actually developing a plan to assassinate the king. So he overhears this. I mean, what are the chances? But he is there in this place. The cousin of the queen is in this place. When he hears it, then he gets the word to Queen Esther that they're making plans to kill the king, and he gives them the names. The research is done. They find out that it is true, and these guys are hung in the gallows. And here's the part that I want you to get. Listen to this. And once the inquiry was made and they were hung, then it says, quote, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So a record was made of what had happened. Two guys were going to kill the king, but a man named Mordecai got word to the queen. We record this. Now, the Persians kept incredible records about absolutely everything, and that's one of the reasons we're able to know so much about them today. But these particular kind of records needed to be kept because that's the way that a king maintained his power in a very unruly culture. He did it by rewarding the loyal and punishing the disloyal. If you're disloyal, we're going to hang you, and if you're loyal, we're going to reward you. So it paid to be a snitch. It was a good thing. So he kept records, and the king's plan was always to reward those who were loyal to him. So this act takes place. It's recorded in the Chronicles. The king plans to reward them, but we don't hear anything about it. For 5 years, nothing else is done. Now we're going to enter another character. And so we see the hand of God, we see the activity of God, we see the representatives of God in Mordecai and in Esther. Now let's enter Satan and in his devious plan, which has not changed. It amazes me how easily the church can be taken advantage of an enemy that is doing what he has always done in the same way that he has always done it. He has a plan to steal, to kill, and to destroy, right? That's what Jesus said, but I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. So we come to chapter 3, and here we meet a man named Haman. This is a man who's been exalted by the king, a capable, intelligent Persian man. And I've already told you, he literally was right next to the king. He was the most recognized of all of the presidents of all of the provinces. And the Bible keeps saying that he was an Agagite. Agagite. He was an Agagite. It says that again and again in chapter 3, verse 1 through 10, again in chapter 8, again in chapter 9, Haman, the Agagite. Those are the kinds of ways when you just read the Bible, you won't really get into this. And so I told you that the king had issued a decree that every time Haman went out into public, anybody who saw him was commanded to bow before him and show him respect as the second most powerful man in all of Persia. However, whenever he would go past, there is Mordecai hanging out at the palace trying to learn what's going on with his cousin Esther. And whenever Haman came past, Mordecai would not bow. That made Haman mad. Now, he would have immediately done something with it, but he knew if he did, he could get himself in some trouble. So he determined that he would develop a plan, and his plan, listen, would not be to simply get rid of Mordecai, but instead to get rid of all Jews. He knew that Mordecai was a Jew, so rather than just getting rid of him, we'll just get rid of all Jews. Now, that's a pretty ambitious plan, right? But here's a guy who's the second most powerful man in the largest empire on the face of the earth. He might just be able to pull it off. So he gets together with the wise men and with the magicians, and he talks to them and said, hey, if I was going to annihilate it, there was going to be a day of genocide where I was going to wipe out the entire Jewish race. If I was going to do that, look at your calendar and tell me when would be a perfect day. They look at the calendar, they appoint the day, having no idea that they're actually appointing confronting a moment in the time of the life of Esther and Mordecai as well. They have no idea they're playing into the hands of God and that God has his sovereign eye and his providences over all of this, but they choose a date, they give him the date, and then he goes to the king and he says, King, I needed to tell you what is going on. You've got these people living in your country. They do not regard your rules nor obey your laws. They do whatever they want to, and they are a problem. In fact, they are a threat to your throne, King. If you don't deal with them, it's going to come back to bite you. But I've got a plan if you'll just let me. In fact, I'll take my own money and I will kill all these people. I'll annihilate them. And just for the record, they are very rich. About 1,000 years ago, they were in Egypt, and when they left Egypt, they did the same thing they're going to do to you. When they left Egypt, they destroyed the Pharaoh and they brought out all the silver and gold. They are incredibly rich. You let me handle this problem for you, and I'll not only pay for it myself, I'll pay those who do the work. Not only that, I'll bring all of the wealth into your treasury. Money talks. Ahasuerus said, great idea. Here is my ring with the seal of the king's ring. You issue whatever command, whatever edict that you will, and carry it out. So with the king's ring, he wrote the edict that said on this particular date, all of these men would go into these various communities, and they would just line it was going to be the Holocaust number one. They were going to just line up all the Jews and just simply get rid of them, and that's what it was going to be. Now you might wonder, how did things get so bad between Mordecai and Haman? If Haman and Mordecai did not have this big divide, this would not have been a problem. I want you to get this, because some of us imagine that we don't have any enemies and life is really good and we'll just go through life fine and it won't really be a problem. I want you to know that there is this epic battle taking place in the heavenlies, and you and I just happen to be a part of it. And so you cannot escape it any more than these men could. So I don't have time for all of this, but I'm going to go back about 550 years. About 550 years earlier, a king named Saul. Remember, the nation of Israel had to have a king. Nothing would do them but to have a king. They wanted a king. They got a guy named Saul. He was handsome and head and shoulders above every other man. And so he was told by God at one point through the prophet Samuel, I want you to go down. There's a king down there named Agag. I want you to go down and get him. And I want you to also wipe out the Amalekites. And I want you to kill everything and everyone, and don't leave any animals and don't leave anything. You got it? Saul said, got it. He went down and did it, but he didn't complete the job. Partial obedience represents an awful lot of trouble. We just kind of treat God like a smorgasbord. He says, here are the instructions. We say, great, I'll do this one, but I don't really care for that one. I don't care for this one, but I'll do this one over here. I'll just do what I want. You know what I'm saying? I kind of like going to church, but I don't like giving in the offering, so I'll go to church, but I won't give. I like going to church, but I don't really like praying, so I'll go to church, but I won't pray. We just kind of got our own thing. You know, we'll just do our own thing. You know, I mean, I'm not being ugly. Sometimes I know that you think I'm ugly, and sometimes I guess I come across as being ugly, but I'm not really ugly. I'm just simply telling you what the rules are, and you feel like I'm ugly when I tell you a rule you don't like. I'm not the rule giver. I'm just a messenger. And I'm not excusing myself, but sometimes we really do miss the point. It's not about us, church. It never was about us. It's about a lost and dying world. We're in the boat. Now we got to be busy getting everybody else in the boat, doing whatever it takes. Doing whatever it takes. So, also, if Saul had obeyed the Lord, Haman would never have been here. You get that? He is an Agagite. Agag, king. 550 years have passed. Saul did not kill Agag. Samuel called him on it. And when Samuel found out, he literally cut the king to pieces. And I want you to know, a lot of people have come and gone, but Satan never forgot that the man of God destroyed one of his. And it's a record, and it burned inside Haman. It said, those people have been giving us trouble for hundreds of years, and here, this guy won't even bow to me. I'll deal with him. Right now, I'm going to avenge what he did to King Agag. So here we have this centuries-old battle. We have heaven and hell waging this war, and we have these two men that are just players carrying out their part. So Mordecai won't bow. Haman issues the decree, and hostility erupts. So the king has agreed to the plan. Everything is taking place just as planned. And now Mordecai hears of the decree. The Bible said that when he heard of the decree, he rent his clothes, covered himself in sackcloth and ashes, and went and sat at the palace door. And Esther heard about it. She heard that her cousin was there in these terrible clothes. So she sent him clothes. He wouldn't put them on. He could not be ministered to in that way. And so he sends word to Esther concerning Haman's plans. He even sends her a copy of the king's decree that bears the king's seal from his ring. And there is a plan and a date to kill every Jew from here all the way to Jerusalem. And he gives her this instruction: Esther, you have to go to the king and plead for the lives of your people. Now, that sounds simple enough, right? You're the queen. Just go tell the king. Don't do this. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. Listen to what it says in Esther 4:11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter that he may live. So what Mordecai was asking was, go talk to the king, and she realized before she ever got to open her mouth, she could be killed. She knew that. That incredible kind of power. We don't know anything about that. That's just stuff we read in novels. We don't know anything about it. That's how it really was. And so she understands that if she makes this move, she's going to lose her life. She is just a young, we would call her a child, a 20-year-old woman. We would call her a child. That's an awful lot of responsibility. That's a big burden to give someone so young. And so she explains how she could not do it because if she did, most likely she would die. And in verses 13 of chapter 4, he says, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. He warns his royal cousin, listen, don't you think just because you're in the palace that you will escape, because when it's said and done, you and your father's household are all going to die. And so he helps her to understand this thing. Whether you do or whether you don't, you could die. I would to God that things would get that plain to us. We either need to get sold out to God, we really need to sell out to God, or we just need to admit that we're not going to. Church, this whole business of playing church isn't going to get us anywhere. This whole thing of going through the motions and acting like everything is cool when it's not cool, acting like we're saved when we're not saved, acting like we're holy when we're unholy, making out, we're just wasting our time because we're going to actually give an account in the end. What kind of game are we playing? You think that you can stay there in the palace and eat the king's food and everything? You're kidding yourself. It won't be that way. You will die either way if you're going to die. So, you're dead if you do and dead if you don't. And then finally he comes and says to her this famous line: who knows whether you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He said, look, you've got to go in and do this. Who knows whether you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? I've got to race because the story really just kind of picks up right here. She finally says, look, this is what we'll do then. You have all the people fast for 3 days. Now, she didn't say fast and pray, but whenever you fast and don't pray, you're just dieting. So she wasn't asking anybody to go on a diet. She was saying fast and pray. You have everybody fast and pray for 3 days. I and all of my Jewish girlfriends in here, we will fast and pray for 3 days. And after 3 days, I'll go in and see the king. And then she concluded by saying, and if I perish, I perish. I'm going to risk everything. I'm going to give it everything that I've got. I'm going to take the chance. There's so much at stake. My God, I would to God that we could see that there's a world perishing around us. And if we would actually throw ourselves completely in the arms of God, we would be in a position to actually make a difference rather than always remaining in a comfortable place. So she said, I'll go. So they fasted and prayed, and she went before the king. Whenever she walked in, guess what? The providence of God is at work. You can read, and I hope you will read the whole book. You will find that it's been now more than 30 days since she has seen the king. He hasn't called for her, so she doesn't go on her own. So it's been a month since she's even seen the king. And let's just be honest, he has other girlfriends. He's a king. He's got a whole harem. So she gets that. That's just the way it is. But she hadn't been called in 30 days. And she knows he might have found somebody he likes better. I mean, all that is going on. But she says, I'll do it. So she goes in and she just simply walks into the throne room. And there's the king on his throne. But the providence of God is at work. And his eyes fell on her and saw her beauty. And again, he swept off his feet. And he says to her, Esther, my beauty, what would you want from your king? Anything up to half of my kingdom. I mean, man, she has got this guy wrapped around her finger. Now, here's the incredible thing. She catches him off guard, and she says, I'll tell you what I want more than anything else. I want to throw a banquet. I want to throw a party for you and Haman. I've just been, that's what I want. And he can't believe that that's all you want, and it seems like a good thing. And so he says yes, and so the next day, I mean, man, they throw a royal party. And Haman, is he up for that? I mean, they're having a party in my honor. The king has finally figured out how valuable I am. In a few days, I'm going to be rid of these Jews, and Mordecai will be dead. In fact, I've got special treatment for Mordecai. I'm going to build him his own special gallows, and we're going to hang that guy on those things. And they go in there, and they were going to go to the party, but here's what happened. The night before the party, the king can't sleep. He can't sleep. He tried everything. He tried watching CNN and C-SPAN. Nothing would work. And he finally decided, if someone would read to me out of the Chronicles, read to me the boring reports of the nation, that would be worse than counting sheep, and I could fall asleep. Have someone bring the royal records. So now you think of the volume of royal records. It's like Washington, D.C. on steroids. Bring the royal records and read to me. So they go get some royal records and gather them up, and somebody brings them in, and they open, and they begin to read what? They begin to read how 5 years ago, a Jewish man named Mordecai is standing at the palace door, and he hears two guys about to assassinate the king, and he's reading this story, and the king says, what did I ever do to reward his loyalty? They scanned through the pages of the record and said, you haven't done anything. He said, well, I've got to get that taken care of first thing tomorrow. So he shows up at the party. There's Haman, there's Esther, and there is the king. And Esther is just waiting for the key moment to mention that this guy is about to kill her and all the Jews. But before anybody can say anything, the king looks at his trusted servant Haman and said, hey, if you were going to reward a man who had been incredibly loyal and responsible for doing so much for his king, how would you reward him? Haman says, man, am I ever up for, here they've called me into this banquet, serving me all this fine food, and now the king is asking me how he should reward me. So I tell you how I would do that, Your Highness. What I would do is I would give him the king's robe, and I would give him the king's horse, and I would send him out in public, and I would send before him a crier who would say, bow before this man, because he deserves honor, because he has been loyal to the king, and the king will treat everyone who is loyal to him like this. To which the king says, great idea, Haman. I'll tell you what I want you to do. As soon as we leave this, I want you to make preparation, and I want you to take Mordecai out in public, and I want you to go before him and cry that the king... My God, we're talking about the Amos 9:13 season. You all are imagining that you're on your own, that you're trying to pay your own bills, that you're trying to repair your own roof, you're trying to raise your own kids. And I just wonder, where do you think God is in all this? I mean, my God, He is just everywhere. I don't know what you were doing, but when they were singing, let it rain, I mean, I don't know if you ever look at me, you shouldn't, but sometimes when I worship, I get all contorted and twisted. You don't know, but whenever they were singing Let It Rain, I was acting like a weed. I know you think I'm crazy. I was acting like a weed. Because whenever it rains, it doesn't just bathe the flowering plants. It doesn't just bathe the decorator's shrubs. But whenever it rains, it drenches the lowly weeds, and everything gets a drink of what comes from heaven. And I'm just, God, if you're going to rain on me. I want to get myself in a position to get some of this. God's sovereignly watching, got His eye on this whole thing. So here goes Haman and Mordecai out, but at the end of lunch, there is no opportunity. At the end of the banquet, there's no opportunity. And Esther says, "Oh, king, if I have found favor in your eyes, could we do this again tomorrow?" And he said, "Sure, my lovely." To which is Haman saying, "It'll be a better picnic tomorrow than it was today. I cannot wait for this." So they go in the next day. When they go in the next day, Esther is all business now, because she's already caught a glimpse of the hand of God. And Mordecai has already been paraded through the streets and praised because he saved the life of the king. And she's the one that told the king that Mordecai had something he needed to know. And so whenever she got just the right moment, she said, "King, I wanted to bring something to your attention. I've never told you before, but I'm a Jewish girl. And there is somebody in your kingdom that despises the Jews. And he has a plan on a certain date, and he's going to annihilate all Jews." And he said, "Who would dare to hurt the wife of the king?" She said, "Him." And the king did not even lose a beat. I don't have time for the whole story. First, he flew into a rage. And while he was stomping around in his rage, Haman fell at the feet of Esther to beg for mercy. He turned around and saw it and thought that he had attacked her in his presence. And he immediately said to the guards, "Get him, take him outside. There's some new gallows. Take him out there and hang him on those." The very gallows that he had built for Mordecai, they took him outside and hung him on that. I want you to hear me. I want you to hear me. Some of you, I just talked yesterday to someone on the phone. You may be here today. I pray that you are. You've been going through something for a long season, something been going for a long time. What a difference 24 hours makes. What a difference a moment makes. What a difference whenever God steps into the circumstance and the waiting is over. I want you to know from that day forward, listen to me, from that day forward, two things happened. First of all, Mordecai became the second most powerful man in all of Persia from that day forward. Just like Joseph did. When Joseph was finally and ultimately released from prison, he went right to the palace and served alongside Pharaoh and was the second most powerful man in the land. And Mordecai, who had been despised, and the enemy had plans to steal, to kill, and to destroy, everything changed in a moment. It was done. And Mordecai and Esther ruled together for many, many years to come, because God stepped in to the scene. I want you to stand with me.